The people who changed the course of world history didn't always wear crowns. Some never commanded armies. Some never won a single election. And some, without their names ever really appearing in headlines, reached a power greater than any king's. Now what if I told you there was a family that financed wars for more than 2 centuries, lent money to governments, shaped the economies of entire continents, and rewrote the rules of modern banking? They didn't build an empire. They learned to control the flow of money. And more often than not, whoever controls the money controls history. This is the story of the Rothschild dynasty. But this story didn't begin in a luxury mansion or a royal palace. It all began in one of Europe's poorest neighborhoods. Frankfurt, the 1740s, one of Europe's major trading centers. But right in the middle of all that wealth stood a small district, walled in by high stone barriers. The Frankfurt Jewish ghetto. The people living here weren't just fighting poverty. They were fighting the law itself. They couldn't own land. They couldn't farm. They were barred from entering most professions. In these narrow streets, cut off from the rest of the city, people fought simply to survive. This is the world Mayor Amschel Rothschild grew up in. The biggest inheritance he had at birth wasn't money. It was restriction. But history shows us something curious. Sometimes the greatest empires aren't born from the greatest freedoms. They're born from the greatest restrictions. Mayer took over the family trade, the textile business. But it didn't take him long to notice something. Selling cloth could make you comfortable, but it wouldn't build a fortune. Real wealth lived wherever the money moved. So he turned his attention to gold coins, rare currency, and antiques. Most people looked at what a coin was worth. Mayer looked at who wanted to buy it. That's what set him apart from every other trader. He wasn't selling a product. He was selling demand. Before long, he caught the attention of Prince William of Hesse-Kassel. The prince wanted to add valuable gold coins to his collection. Rather than simply acting as a middleman, Mayer developed a far shrewder method. He'd buy the coins first, on his own account, then sell them to the prince. Today, finance has different terms for arrangements like this. Under the conditions of the time, Mayer's approach let him profit twice, once from the commission, once from the price gap, by using an edge in information and timing. This single arrangement earned him a small fortune. But more importantly, it earned him the trust of the right people. And in the world of finance, trust is worth more than gold itself. By the 1780s, Mayer was no longer just an ordinary trader. He'd become one of Frankfurt's most successful financiers. But his ambition was bigger than that. Because wealthy people make money. Powerful people control it. That's why he turned his business into a bank. This decision didn't just change his career. It changed the history of European finance. But Mayer's real genius wasn't found in the bank. It was knowing how to grow it. Because a massive problem stood in his way. Europe was growing. Trade was growing. Wars were growing. And governing an entire continent from a single city was impossible. Most people would have built a bigger bank. Mayer thought much bigger than that. Mayer had 5 sons, and each one of them would become far more than a single branch of a bank. The plan was simple, but it was decades ahead of its time. One son would stay in Frankfurt. The others would be sent to Europe's most important financial centers. Vienna, Key, Paris, Naples, and most important of all, London. This was no longer just a family. This was Europe's first international financial network. And very soon, this network would become a weapon more powerful than any army. Because the young man heading to London, Nathan Rothschild, was about to change not just his family's fate, but the future of modern finance itself. In the early 1800s, the world's most powerful country wasn't France. It wasn't Austria. It wasn't Prussia either. The economic center of the world was now Great Britain. The Industrial Revolution kept the factories running without pause. The British Navy controlled the oceans, and London was becoming the place where capital from every corner of the world converged. Mayer Rothschild understood this. If his family stayed confined to Germany, they'd be powerful. But if they took root in London, they wouldn't just be part of the world, they'd be at its very center. That's why he sent his third son, Nathan Rothschild, to London. He didn't arrive with an army behind him. He had no ties to the royal court. All he had was roughly £20,000 in capital and a single principle his father had taught him. Follow wherever the money moves. When Nathan arrived in London, he could have done what most merchants did. Open a shop. Sell textiles. Grow slowly, one step at a time. But Nathan's goal wasn't to make money. It was to understand the market. At the time, England's textile industry was booming. Most entrepreneurs only made money off the finished cloth. Nathan decided to control the entire chain instead. Cotton, dye, manufacturing, distribution. He started earning income from every stage of the same product, instead of just one. Today we call this vertical integration. Nathan was doing it 200 years ago. The results were staggering. In a short time, his capital multiplied several times over. But textiles weren't what really made him rich. What made him rich was information. Today, news reaches the other side of the world in seconds. In the 1800s, news sometimes took days, even weeks, to arrive. That delay meant a fortune. Nathan saw this before anyone else did. His brothers, scattered across Europe, were constantly sending word back. Governments, bond markets, gold prices, war preparations, political crises. Every member of the family wasn't just a banker in whatever city they lived in. They were also a trusted observer, gathering information. This intelligence traveled through the family via letters, private couriers, and the fastest transportation methods of the era. This let the Rothschild network move faster than most of its rivals. Here's the key point. One of the strongest factors behind the Rothschild family's success was their fast information network and international coordination. Contrary to many of the exaggerated stories told in popular culture, this was the core advantage historians actually agree on. And in the world of finance, sometimes an edge of just a few hours can be worth millions. In 1803, Europe was dragged back into war. Napoleon. France. Britain. Austria. Russia. Almost the entire continent was at war. Armies didn't just need soldiers. They needed weapons. They needed ammunition. They needed food. And before any of that, they needed money. A government can declare war. But if it can't pay its army, it can't sustain that war. This is exactly where the Rothschild family stepped in. Nathan in London, James in Paris, Salomon in Vienna, Amschel in Frankfurt, Karl in Naples. They operated as a single, interconnected financial network. They didn't just transfer money. They moved gold safely across borders, organized currency exchanges, and facilitated international payments for governments. For the time, this was an extraordinary organization, and it earned the family enormous prestige. One of the most told stories about the Rothschild family involves the Battle of Waterloo. According to the popular version, Nathan Rothschild learned the outcome of the battle before anyone else, manipulated the London Stock Exchange, and made an enormous fortune in a single day. This story has been repeated for years in books, documentaries, and across the internet. But historians say key parts of this account have never been proven. What we know for certain is this: Nathan's information network really was extremely fast. He had real financial ties to the British government. And during the war years, he played a significant role in government bonds and international payments. But there's no reliable historical evidence supporting the claim that he crashed the market and built his entire fortune in a single day. The truth may be less dramatic than the legend, but it's more impressive. Because Nathan's fortune wasn't built in a single day. It was the result of years of disciplined financial strategy. And right around this time, the Rothschild family wasn't just becoming the wealthiest family in Europe. They were also becoming bankers whose door even kings would knock on. Nathan Rothschild was no longer just a successful merchant. His real ambition was much bigger: to build his own bank and make it even stronger than his father's bank in Frankfurt. This was exactly the period when Europe was living through one of the bloodiest chapters in its history: the Napoleonic Wars. The international financial network the Rothschild family had built over the years was facilitating governments' cross-border payments and playing a critical role in wartime gold and currency transfers. Separate from the popular legends told about the Battle of Waterloo, one documented activity historians actually agree on is Nathan Rothschild's financial operations supporting the British government's international payments. In 1814, the commander of the British Army, the Duke of Wellington, was planning a major military campaign in France to finally defeat Napoleon. But there was a very serious problem. The troops needed to be paid. And on French soil, no less, in French currency. The British government had no idea how to make that happen. Nathan Rothschild saw the solution. He bought up the East India Company's massive gold holdings. He transported the gold across Europe. He converted it into local currencies in different countries. And he financed the British Army. This operation didn't just bring in a huge profit. It completely transformed Nathan's relationship with the British government. He was no longer just a banker. He was a financial partner that states themselves needed. The longer the war dragged on, the more the Rothschild family's fortune grew. Because institutions capable of organizing the flow of money had become one of the most critical parts of any war economy. Nathan's wealth compounded, year after year. Before long, he'd become one of the most powerful bankers in Europe. Many historians even consider him one of the wealthiest people of his era. But success is never permanent. In 1836, Nathan Rothschild died at only 58 years old. London was shaken. The newspapers of the day treated his death not as the passing of an ordinary businessman, but as a historic event that affected the European economy. Because by then, everyone knew. Nathan wasn't just a banker. He was one of the central figures of the entire European financial system. But here's the interesting part. Nathan died. But the system he built lived on. Because the Rothschild family was never dependent on a single person. Each brother operated in a different country. Decisions were made jointly. Capital was pooled. Risk was spread across the whole family. Today, we might call this a decentralized organizational model. At the time, this approach was nearly unheard of. After Nathan's death, leadership passed to his brother James Rothschild in Paris, and the family began looking for a new opportunity. This time, the target wasn't wars. It would be the greatest investment of the Industrial Revolution: railways. Leading the family after Nathan, James Rothschild knew that wars wouldn't keep generating the same profits forever. The world was changing. The Industrial Revolution was accelerating. And the greatest investment of this new age was railways. By the mid-1800s, Europe was practically being stitched together by rail lines. These new railways didn't just speed up transportation. Factories could produce more. Mines could ship faster. Cities were being connected to one another. The way the internet transformed the economy today, railways were the internet of that era. James saw this before anyone else did. The Rothschild family financed dozens of railway projects. They lent money to companies. They issued bonds. They brought investors together. And they earned a commission on every single transaction. But there was something else notable about how they operated. They avoided putting their own capital at risk whenever possible. Instead, they organized investors' capital, financed the projects, and earned massive income through management fees. This was one of the earliest examples of the model investment banks still used today. But success didn't last long. In 1848, Europe suffered a massive economic and political crisis. Revolution broke out in France. The government was drowning in debt. The economy was shaken. The Rothschild Bank in Paris came to the brink of collapse. This is where the strength of the family system revealed itself. James asked for help. Without a moment's hesitation, Lionel Rothschild, Nathan's son in London, extended a massive loan to Paris. The bank was saved. Because there was one unbreakable rule within the family. No branch would ever be left to fall alone. This solidarity set the Rothschild family apart from every other bank. But around this same time, a new player was stepping onto the stage. The Morgan Dynasty. The American banker Junius Morgan was closely watching the balance of power in Europe. He'd seen how the Rothschilds had grown by financing wars. He decided to use the exact same method himself. In 1870, war broke out between France and Prussia, Dutch. The Rothschild family believed France couldn't win this war, so they avoided extending major credit to the French government. Junius Morgan, however, thought differently. For him, the outcome of the war wasn't what mattered. What mattered was whether the borrowing country could eventually repay its debt. France lost the war, but it kept paying off its debts. Morgan made an enormous profit. This single deal turned the Morgan dynasty into one of the most important investment banks in the world. The Rothschild family now had a genuine rival. And this rival wasn't coming from Europe. It was coming from America. Meanwhile, the United States was growing rapidly. Railways, steel mills, oil companies. New billionaires were emerging. John D. Watt, Rockefeller Dar, Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, Turnte, and the banks financing them were turning Wall Street into the world's new financial center. For years, the Rothschild family had looked down on America. As far as they were concerned, the real financial centers were still London and Paris. But time would prove exactly the opposite. In 1893, America experienced one of the greatest economic crises in its history. Hundreds of companies collapsed. Banks went under. Gold reserves were rapidly running out. The U.S. government faced a serious threat. This is exactly the moment when J.P. Morgan stepped in. Morgan didn't have enough gold on his own. So he partnered with the Rothschild family, who had controlled one of the world's largest gold reserves for years. Together, they supplied the American government with millions of dollars worth of gold. This operation calmed the markets. The crisis was brought under control. But it also revealed something important. The center of the financial world was now slowly shifting from Europe to America. The leader of the 20th century wouldn't be London. It would be Wall Street. By the start of the 20th century, Europe once again stood on the edge of a major war. Britain dow, France co, Germany t, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. The tension that had been building between them for years was no longer containable. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria set off the First World War. This war was unlike anything the Rothschild family had ever seen before. Millions of soldiers were sent to the front. Trench warfare began. New weapons were developed. And for the first time in history, the Rothschild family's banks, operating across different countries, were directly affected by the political divisions the war created. The London branch in Britain and the Paris branch in France operated within the Allied powers, while the family's activities in Germany were severely restricted by wartime conditions. For the first time at this scale, the international financial network the family had spent decades building ran into geopolitical barriers. Even so, their banks continued operating. They issued war bonds. They provided financing to governments. But this time, the balance of power had shifted. After the United States entered the war, J.P. Morgan became the U.S. government's most important financial partner. The Rothschild family, once the undisputed leader of Europe, was now competing in the same league as American giants like Morgan. When the war ended, Europe was economically devastated. But an even bigger disaster was on the way. The Great Depression of 1929, followed by rising nationalism. And finally, Adolf Hitler. Hitler's rise to power wasn't just a threat to European politics. It was a massive threat to the Jewish Rothschild family as well. The family's operations in Germany came to an end. Members in France were forced to flee the country. A great deal of property was seized. Some family members took refuge in Britain, others in the United States. Throughout the Second World War, the Rothschild family suffered massive financial losses. But they didn't disappear entirely, because the strategy they'd followed for over a century kept them standing. Never depend on a single country. Spread your wealth across different geographies, and preserve cooperation within the family. After the war, the world changed completely. The center of the global economy was no longer Europe. The United States had become the new superpower. Wall Street had overtaken London. The Rothschild family accepted this and changed their strategy. Instead of financing state wars the way they used to, they moved into investment banking, asset management, private equity investments, energy, mining, wine production, real estate, and wealth management. In the 1970s and 1980s, new disagreements emerged within the family. Some argued the bank should go public and grow that way. Others believed family control should never be given up under any circumstances. These debates dragged on for years. Around the same time, the financial scandal surrounding British media mogul Robert Maxwell also brought the Rothschild name back into the headlines. After Maxwell's death, it emerged that he had embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars from a pension fund. The Rothschild family's direct connection to the affair was never proven. But even having their name mentioned alongside the scandal was a serious test for their reputation. Today, the picture looks very different. The Rothschild family is no longer the biggest bank in the world, but they're still considered one of the most influential financial families on the planet. Investment banking, wealth management, mergers and acquisitions, private equity funds, energy, mining, agriculture, and global advisory work, they're still active in all of it. A story that began roughly 250 years ago in the narrow streets of Frankfurt is still unfolding today in the world's financial capitals. So what was the real secret behind the Rothschild family's success? Just money? No. Their real strength was getting information before anyone else. Never concentrating risk in one place. Thinking long-term. And, most importantly, placing family interest above individual interest. That's exactly why. For more than 2 centuries, they managed to remain one of the most powerful families in world finance.